Good morning for those of us in California and the West Coast, the burning coast. We're here saying hello to Monica LoCascio. Good afternoon and good evening, Monica. It's so good to have you here. Just a
Thank you so
short
much.
intro to the hi, short intro to the audience. We met, I guess it feels like 5 years ago, but it was only a little year and a plus ago, when Angewandte was preparing a banquet at the Angewandte Innovation Lab. And Monica came on to help out with a dinner, Hug Zodiac dinner we were doing, and we started collaborating. I love working with her because she brought to the environment of very high tech, innovation lab, VR, AR, etc., that all of us are surrounded with, especially in media arts and art and science, of course, bringing in all the other scientific tech stuff, the body and the mind and spiritual practice and rituals, and a lot of our own communication was intuitive and still is. That really crosses space and time, so you realize that actually there is no such thing. And she was also participating as a teacher, and she is a teacher, as well as an amazing artist. So, as a teacher, she started getting deeper into how to get students to think about their presence, their body, and in general, the complexity of our energetic being. So, she looks wildly in her research and developed a wonderful workshop on fibers and weaving that are connected to the fascia, which I knew a little bit about, but as she was teaching it and discussing it and sending descriptions of it, I got more and more fascinated. So you're in for quite a beautiful talk. We're all on the screen all the time, so she'll get us off screen. And I just wanted to welcome you, Monica. Thank you so much for starting my morning like this. I really appreciate it. Maybe you can tell us a little bit what you're planning for today.
Sure. First of all, thank you for the wonderful introduction, Victoria, for having me as part of the ArtSci Lab and Studio team, to Ars Electronica for having us here, to Zainab and Ivana for your help. I just appreciate it all so much, and I'm excited to be here. So as Victoria mentioned, my name is Monica LoCascio. I'm a multimedia artist focusing mostly with textile and fibers. I live in Vienna, Austria, coming to you live today from my studio in the 17th district. And I'm currently in a master's program at the Angewandte here, the University of Applied Arts, in a program called Art and Science, which has been great. And I'm about to present my master's this semester. So very excited to be here. We're going to do things a little bit different today than I think most of the programming that you'll find here. I'm actually going to ask you to turn away from your laptops or devices and just listen. I'm going to turn off my camera, and we're just going to take the time to kind of absorb the information with our ears. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about why in a minute. But for now, to just think about, giving your nervous system a break, giving your eyes a rest from the blue light that comes through the screens that we're absorbing every day, all day. I know for me, when I'm listening to something and maybe drawing or doing a little bit of something with my hands and just paying attention to the words, I have great ideas. And so if you do have great ideas during this process, please comment below or write in the chat. Zainab will graciously pass any of your questions on to me. So please do let me know if you make any connections. So I'm going to turn off the screen, and then a little bit later in the workshop, we'll put some slides up when we get to the weaving section, the weaving tutorial. So you have a little bit of visual cues. And yeah, if you have any questions, please also post them to the chat. So for now, Please turn off your screens, turn away, and we'll get started. So I'm going to talk today, I'm going to introduce myself and some material. We're going to go into Johannes Kepler. So apropos, I actually started developing this workshop prior to the Kepler's Gardens Ars Electronica theme. So I'm doubly excited to be presenting a little bit about him today. Then we're going to move on to Anni Albers and a little bit about the Bauhaus, into trauma and body memory, fascia and mycelium, and then how this all ties back to weaving. So we are going to cover a lot of ground. I'm going to try to weave together this story for you, and I'm very excited to present the material. So to get started, just a little bit about my practice. As Victoria mentioned, my work focuses very much on the primacy of the body. I've been using embroidery as a medium almost exclusively for the past couple of years. It's a practice that I started as a very young girl. My grandfather's twin sister actually taught me how to embroider when I was about 5 years old, and how to crochet and do a lot of different other kind of handicrafts. And I picked it back up later in life, and it's brought just all of the philosophical and theoretical work that I am doing together practically. So it's been quite a great journey. For my master's thesis, I was actually encouraged by Victoria to look at the materiality of what I was working with. So for the last few years, I was working with industrially produced fabric and industrially dyed thread. And so I started kind of leaning into that and trying to find ways to create my work with materials that spoke to what I was actually making work about. And so in the last year-ish, I've started working growing SCOBY, which is, if anyone's ever made kombucha, it's a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast that grows on the top of the fermenting tea, and you can dry it into a very leather-like material. I'm also using hair and wood and materials that hold memory and that bring us back to how memory is stored in the body. A big part of my work is also trauma and how trauma is stored in the body. This comes from my own journey of healing, and it's been a huge inspiration for me to learn more about it, what it is, how it works, how we heal from it. And this is very much where I pull the inspiration from my work from. So, as promised, a little bit more about why I'm turning the screens off. It's a happy, I think, outcome. I do really like this format, but was kind of forced into this because about a week ago, I had a bike accident and fell on the street, and thankfully I was wearing my helmet, but I got a concussion. And so for the last week and a half, I've been unable to look at screens actually for more than a minute or two without getting a really crazy headache. And it's been quite an intense journey. It's brought up so much about how tied to screens I am, thinking about how much I rely on my screen, and even reading. I've had a hard time reading just normal textbooks. And thinking a lot, meditating a lot about, how tied I am to absorbing material and information in that way. I've also been in a bit of a bubble from news. I haven't been on social media for a long time. And all of this has made me think a lot about what we're doing to ourselves with these screens, that we're absorbing so much information through our eyes and our brain. But so much of my work is about how we sense things and know things with our body, and not with our eyes, and not with our brain, and not with our neurons, but rather with our actual body, neck down, ears, also nose. And, I've been able to talk, I've been able to move and to think and to make art. And all of that is helping me heal my brain and my body from the concussion and from the accident trauma. So I think this format of having people turn off their screens and listen is not only helpful for me, but maybe can help all of us kind of get in our bodies more for this information and see what we can sense and absorb through our bodies. The workshop is based structurally and thematically on my process, and I know it's a process that many other artists and scientists who work in this field use. And that is that we all have a vortex and plethora of sources and books and papers and inspirations and visual notes and all sorts of things that we weave together into new metaphors and new ways of thinking and new ways of truth making. It's really, I think, why I was attracted to this field. I'm always reading, 12 books at a time, and just have so many sources always kind of front and center in my mind. And working in art and science allows us to take things and use them in different ways, and in doing so create these very rich metaphors and analogies and ways of thinking around things that we wouldn't usually have the opportunity to do if we weren't kind of smashing together seemingly disparate subjects. I think in this space, we have space to imagine more, and things just come together in the most unexpected and illuminating ways. So with that, I want to get into it. And before I forget, I do want to just give a shout out again to Victoria. Thank you for introducing me, for helping me so much conceptually with this workshop, and also to Dr. Ellen Heed, who may or may not be here right now. She is a brilliant therapist who does a lot of work with the body and trauma, and gave me a lot of resources. And also to Caitlin Bryson, who is an amazing woman artist. She's also part of the Artside Collective, and she is going to be doing a workshop later today, and also presenting her artwork as part of the gardens. Her workshop is called Mycelial Landscapes, How Fungi Shape the World and Take the Shape of the Future. That's at 12 o'clock today, LA time. And then at 7 p.m. LA time, she's going to show her collaborative multimedia installation called Trans Relations. And you can find all the information about that on the Telluric Vibrations website. She helped a lot also with this workshop with the mycelium info. We'll get into that in a bit. So to begin, I know that this is reality, and it just strikes me that I think that this is also something that art and science practitioners partake in. We find a medium or a data set or a experience in the world and play with it and examine it and study it until we make art out of it. So I really liked how that ties into our art and science theme today, and it's something I hadn't previously thought about either. So as I mentioned, back to Annie, she actually eventually became the head of the workshop at the Bauhaus. And she, as a prolific writer, really elevated weaving as an art form. She argued for the distinct artistic quality of woven textiles. She analyzed textile structures. She really went deep on the material of the weaving. And as I mentioned, and I'll mention it again, she really catapulted weaving into a strata of fine art that no one had really done before. In 1933, she fled the Nazis and went to America and went on to teach at the famous Black Mountain College. And in 1949, she was actually the first textile designer to have a solo exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. In her later years, she actually took all of the philosophies and ideas that she had around weaving and then took that process and applied it to printmaking. Which is again an instance of analogy, right? We're using one form on another medium and vice versa, and kind of taking these forms and processes and experimenting with what comes out when we mash these things together. So how then does all of this tie together a little bit more? As I mentioned in the description of the workshop, I wanted to talk a little bit about the body's biggest sensory organ. So I want to shift focus from the world of textile fibers to the world of microscopic webs of fibers and the body. So as I mentioned earlier, my work really focuses on the primacy of the body as a sensory tool over the brain. So how we use the body as a source of understanding, truth-making, memory, and that much of my work actually focuses on trauma and how that's stored in the body. So trauma is a vast and complicated topic. It's unfortunately very common and very widespread, and it's not a light subject. Unfortunately, we find ourselves in a world where we are constantly being traumatized, I think, whether it's from the destruction of our environment, the oppression of our communities and loved ones and neighbors, the COVID keeping us locked and afraid to go outside and afraid to hug our parents even. There's just, fascism. There's so much happening in the world that is just constantly bombarding us with things that could traumatize us. And so part of my work is to understand how that works and how we can actually heal that trauma and heal and kind of encourage our bodies to heal, even though we're amidst all of this chaos. So, when we experience something traumatic, our hormones, our muscles, our digestive system, our hearts, everything in our body responds in a way that will prepare our bodies to escape that danger, right? This is where this fight or flight response comes in that I think some of you might have heard of before. It's when something really traumatic happens, some of us freeze and can't move. Some of us fight and get aggressive, some run away. These are, ancient mechanisms that our body has evolved to escape the tiger jumping out at us in the Stone Age and run away and survive. Trauma is an experience of the body. It's what happens in our body when we witness or experience something that's perceived as threatening to our existence, something dangerous, something that's too much, too fast. It's really when the body is overwhelmed by an emotional and spontaneous protective mechanism. And it's actually imprinted in our body at lightning speed. It's in our body, it's in our muscle memory, and therefore when we experience that trauma again, when we experience the event that caused the trauma again, our body will remember and won't be caught unprepared, so we can actually protect ourselves from that specific threat or existence. So it's actually a normal reaction to abnormal conditions and circumstances. That's a quote from Menachem, who wrote a great book called My Grandmother's Hands, which I highly recommend to everyone. So trauma is widespread, it's common, it's harmful, it's a costly public health issue, and it's stored in our bodies. Even though it's actually an effective tool for survival, the problem is that we save this trauma in our bodies, and we're therefore kind of stuck in this loop of stress hormones in our blood and reaction over responding. It becomes woven into the makeup of our physiological processes. It just becomes part of who we are. when a zebra is running away from a lion and it survives, or any other animal, when it survives a traumatic experience, you'll actually notice in animals that they'll shake their pelt or they'll have what looks like a seizure. And that's literally the body processing and metabolizing trauma and shaking it out, right? But we, as kind of modern humans who live in cities, we don't really have that response or mechanism. Sometimes you will see, though, in like disaster circumstances, whole communities spring to action to rebuild and to save and to rescue. And that's actually a beautiful way that these people and communities are not only helping each other to heal from the trauma on the surface level, but they're also, because of the action of their bodies, processing the trauma. So what then happens when the trauma is not processed and metabolized, but rather gets stuck in our body? And a lot of my research is based around what is that actual mechanism? Like, why does this trauma get stuck in our body? How is it expressed? And how is it actually stored? And in that research, I've come to this amazing organ. It's actually a generic anatomical term that refers to this giant web of soft, fibrous, connective tissues called the fascial system, or fascia. I'm going to be quoting, or not quoting, but citing from two papers, which I'm going to post in the comment section after this talk. One is by Paolo Tosi, called Does Fascia Hold Memories? And the other is called Connective Tissue, a Body-Wide Signaling Network by Helene M. Langevin. And pulling from both of those, they're great reads if you want to learn more about this. So the fascial system can, and I quote, plausibly be considered a memory organ, because it not only registers the functions of the structures it surrounds and connects, but it also memorizes any function or information arriving and departing from the same structures. So what actually is fascia? It is the largest organ in our body. It is a sometimes microscopic, sometimes a little bigger, giant web of tiny fibers, mostly made of collagen, collagen and water. And it's actually the scaffolding of our body. It's the structural support system. So it's the thing that makes sure that muscles glide and move the way they need to while they're being supported. It helps bind the body together. It's what gives us our shape as humans. It intertwines and weaves together every single organ, muscle, bone, tendon, ligament, nerve in the whole body. And it helps us move as an integrated unit. It also allows for space to be held within our body. It's in our bones. It surrounds our brain and our spinal cord and our peripheral nerves. And it is also itself highly innervated. So fascia is literally like the connector of our whole body. And interestingly enough, it wasn't actually studied very much until recently. It was kind of this like extra tissue that got cut away during cadaver dissections, and just kind of thought about as extra tissue. One kind of grotesque example is if you've ever had a piece of meat and you can like kind of pull that meat apart. Sometimes with beef or really stringy meat, you'll see these like kind of gelatinous strings. That is fascia. It's highly complex. It's still not fully understood. There's tons of research going on at the moment. Really, really interesting stuff. And what I find to be really interesting, the most interesting, is that it can transmit and perceive tiny changes in tension in the body. And because it is a web that covers our entire body, we can sense things with our fascia in different parts of our body that are very far away, and we can sense them very quickly. because it can trigger a chain reaction. So if you think about fascia as like a spider web, right? So if a fly hits the outermost portion of a spider web, the spider can still feel it, even though it's minute, because it vibrates the whole web of fascia. Fascia is something that it's made, as I mentioned, of all these different fibers that can shift and move and change dynamically and immediately to stimuli. Victoria, did you have something to jump in on? Okay. So when I started researching fascia deeper and deeper, what kept coming up for me was actually mycelium. And this is something that I have to give, again, a shout out to Caitlin Bryson, who I hope is here, who is the queen of mycelium. And we had a couple conversations about this, because fascia, as this microscopic web that holds together all the parts of the body, that stores memory in many ways, is very similar to mycelium and the ways that mycelium is in our earth. So for those of you who are not familiar with the term, mycelium refers to the body of the fungus. So in Caitlin's words, it is a dense, multidimensional network of microscopic threads that form a branching system, creating a dynamic, decentralized network that shares and distributes resources. So this was something that I had learned about a while ago, several sources. I find it fascinating because it really is this organ that connects all of the plants in our on our planet. Caitlin goes on, this relationship is ubiquitous on Earth, and it's understood to be a determining factor in a plant's life, how it is connected to other plants through the soil via this mycorrhizal network. So when we look at these two things side by side, we've got the mycelium and the fascia. They're both these microscopic webs of tiny little fibers that the mycelium holds, binds together plants' root systems, essentially, and the fascia binds together our organs, our bones, our muscles, our tendons. And, the study of the human body for a very long time was very separated. People studied the heart, or they studied the stomach, or they studied this or that. These different systems in the body are all kind of studied, and there's silos in science where people get very, very narrow and focus on one thing. But actually, with fascia research, we're finding more and more that all of our body is connected via this fascia, this densely innervated, fibrous network, microscopic web, just as plant roots are connected via this mycorrhizal network. So sure. If you missed the beginning part of the talk, I've asked everyone to turn off their screen because number one, I have a concussion at the moment and I can't look at the screen. So I've actually turned mine way down and turned it away from me. And as I was thinking about whether or not I could even do this presentation, Victoria suggested that perhaps we have the screens off then, which is I thought to be a great idea because it gives us all a chance to actually calm our nervous systems, not look at the blue light of the screen. So it's no accident that you can't see anything. And I encourage you just to listen with your ears and your body for now. And then when we get to the weaving section, we'll put some slides up on the screen. Were there any other questions while I'm at it? Okay. So we'll keep going with the mycelium fascia connection. So not only do we have these, microscopic web-like systems that hold together our different essential parts, but we also have in fascia something called a ground substance, which is a kind of a viscous, transparent fluid that's like raw egg whites. And it's what all of the different fascia, different strands of fascia and fibroblasts and all the different cells of the fascia are all held within this ground substance. So not only do we have this kind of analogical structural comparison between fascia and mycelium, but we also have an actual term for fascia called the ground substance, within which all the fascia is held. So again, in fascia, the continuity of the fascial system is actually vitally important for all of the organs that it surrounds and correlates, because it makes sure that they function properly. It also helps with metabolic and hormonal responses. And fascia serves as a whole body communication system that links all of these disparate systems. Our skeletal, our respiratory, our digestive, these are all linked together via the fascia. And if you go back to mycelium, you have this relationship where the mycorrhizal fungi not only is the connective tissue of all the Earth's plant life, but it also is a vital component for the Earth, like respiration and metabolism and communication. And furthermore, through these dense mycorrhizal networks, there is a mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship between plants. So plants can actually immobilize minerals and nutrients in the soil for their plant hosts in exchange for excess carbon, sugars made by the plant through photosynthesis. And plants can actually transfer nutrients and resources from, say, a dying tree, can transfer its nutrients and resources through these mycorrhizal networks to a live tree if that other tree is dying. So these networks of fascia and mycelium, again, not only serve as like the scaffolding for the ground, which is the body or the earth, but also serve as these communication and signaling networks where resources can be shared and transported, and also where communication can happen. So signals can be sent from one plant to another via mycelium. Signals can be sent from one part of the body to another via fascia. And these processes can happen quite quickly. One last really interesting structural analogy between fascia and mycelium is they're actually networks of these small microtubules. So they're tiny, tiny little tubes, essentially, like arteries, through which water travels. And they can grow and they can change and they can respond to stimulus. Now, I'm talking both about mycelium and fascia. So we have this really rich analogy between these two massively important structures for both our bodies and the planet. And I think it's really interesting to think about, hypothetically, maybe, if mycelium is the fascia of the planet, let's just go with that metaphor. How might we help the planet heal? And how might we use therapeutic methods that we use to heal the fascia of our body and to heal the trauma that's stored in our body, perhaps on the earth? So that's just a hypothetical question that I kind of want to throw out there. And Ivana is telling me you only have 9 minutes left, which I thought we had 20, but that's okay because I can breeze through a couple things. Going one step further, so back into the healing, back into the trauma, back into why I'm even talking about fascia in the first place, and why this all has to do with weaving. So many of the ways and methodologies in which we are able to heal the body from trauma and release trauma from the body have to do with rhythmic practices. They are body-based, they are vibratory, they're methods for soothing and healing the body that have to do with rhythm. I very much believe that this has to do also with us being in the present moment, with connecting to time and the rhythms of our body. There's many things that we do as humans that are intuitive to heal from things like this, such as rocking or dancing, breathing, yoga, shaking, rubbing, touching our body, holding a body part. Even singing and humming can be incredibly healing, especially when we are experiencing a traumatic event or new trauma or traumatic flashbacks. But also some of the clinical practices that help us heal from trauma also have to do with repetitive movements. There is a very successful treatment called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, somatic experiencing, sensory motor, psychotherapy. All of these successful therapies for traumatized bodies have to do with repetitive movement. And so this is where, for me, it all kind of ties together, pun intended, through art making that has a rhythmic process. So for me, it's very much been embroidery and also weaving. But these types of repetitive micro movements help us ground in time, help us ground in our bodies. Of course, things like massage, which is also repetitive, slow, working on the body, working on our muscles, releasing tension. These kinds of practices, when everything is so chaotic and when we're feeling completely overwhelmed, can be very, very soothing and can help us get to a place where we can settle and maybe even heal. Weaving is rhythmic. We use our hands, it's in our bodies, it's soothing. And I think last but not least, a very important element of this is that we bring order to disorder with weaving. So we have all of this string and all of these different threads and all the, these balls of yarn or thread, and we can actually put these kind of chaotic lines into a rhythmic order with our body movement, with what we're looking at. It's very satisfying when you've finished a woven piece. And so for me, working in these kinds of methodologies is very powerful. And it's why I wanted to weave together all of these stories, introduce the concept of fascia to you, introduce the concept of body memory, and then teach you how to weave, actually. And I do have a tutorial for how to create a basic loom that I put together for you all. Thankfully, I made this before my bike accident, so I was able to get things down on slides. And I'm going to post these slides for public access in the comments of this live YouTube page as soon as we are off the live presentation for you all to follow along. Some of you may have received a RSVP link from me. If you did and have questions, please send me an email if you want more information. And as I mentioned before, I'm also going to post a few resources in the comments of papers about fascia. But I want to leave you with one passage from a talk by Anni Albers that she gave at the, I think the Museum of Modern Art. And she was talking about weaving to a bunch of kind of high society women, and she asked them to do this little thought experiment. And I want to leave you all with this. I'm going to read it for you. This has been really inspiring to me, thinking about the analogy of mycelium and fascia and the planet and healing, and how we can, find things and weave them together and make meaning. So this is Anni Albers. There you are on the coastline with absolutely nothing there except for what nature has put there. The sea is rolling in, and there are many types of seaweed and dead branches and sand, and possibly even the skeletons of fish and shells. And it is not just the life of the ocean. There can be animal hides from creatures that have wandered from the jungle or forest. I would tell these people who wanted to learn about weaving that they should consider whatever possibility they wanted of how to construct a loom and what materials they might use. I propose that they imagine how they might make threads of all sorts of colors and differing levels of strength in the widths that they wanted, maybe cut with a sharp stone. I did not specify. I just encouraged them to come up with their own ideas of how, starting with nothing they could buy, nothing that had been made for them in advance, only all this bounty given to them, that they could make textiles, and to think about how they would use these textiles to construct bags or clothing or whatever they needed. So this is a thought experiment that Anni Albers gave us probably 60, 70 years ago. And I will leave you with that. It was an absolute pleasure. And as I mentioned, if you have questions, comments, ideas, insights, I would love for you to post them in the comments and chat below. So thank you.